Hello, everyone. Hey, hey, welcome. There are a couple more seats over here. Fill it up, please. I want to show my boss that there are people who care about code reviews, so welcome. Come on in. There's a couple more seats here, and in the middle. And while we wait for those, I'm going to take the obligatory selfie, if you don't mind, because again, I want to prove that there are people who care about code reviews. So, on 3, 1, 2, 3, code reviews. All right. That's my proof for social media. Now we can get to the actual talk. Hello, everyone. I'm Adrienne Tacke. I am a senior developer advocate and Cisco DevNet programs lead. You don't have to care about any of that right now. What you should care about is that I'm also the author of a book called Looks Good to Me. And what you're about to hear are some of the best parts of that book. I've curated it to, if you had to speed read through it, this is what you would want to know. Who here is familiar with this emoji? Raise your hand. Who has regretted giving this emoji? Raise your hand. This is exactly what I want to pinpoint today. This infamous acronym in software development that we've all are probably getting used to or may have been seeing for the first time stands for Looks Good to Me. And what this used to mean was that if you received that emoji or you received an LGTM on a code review, that a reviewer has looked at your code and that everything seems to be okay, that they have done some due diligence, they've looked at the code, and it's pretty much safe to merge into the rest of your code base or to progress along the rest of your pipeline. The problem is there's a lot of things that can go wrong with this process. I'm sure you all know this. I'm sure you're all thinking of it. I'm sure that's why you're here in this talk today. And so we're going to go over what those things are. What are we doing wrong? Why do we not love our code reviews? Why are we not advocating for it as much as I am? And after we learn about what we're doing wrong, I'm going to tell you how to fix all of those things. It may not work for your team, but they certainly will start some important discussions that you may start with your team. And finally, once we get those laid out, because in my opinion, doing all of those things means you get the most productive code reviews as a bare minimum, then we go beyond that. What can you do better? What can your team be doing better? How could your code reviews actually accelerate your productivity as a team? So what are we doing wrong? In order to answer this question, we have to look at it from the perspective of two different people. We have to look at it through the reviewer's eyes, and we have to look at it through the author's eyes, because these are the two, in my opinion, are the most important parts or the most important characters in the code review. And we'll start with the reviewer. Number 1, not leaving your ego at the door. A lot of people tend to use the code review as this sort of competition. They use it to show everyone how smart they are. They use it to tell everybody there's a better way to do this. And they use it in the ways that we probably hate as a team. We use the code review to say, I'm better than you. I am better in creating code. I am more clever than you. But that is a very, very big problem that causes a really, really bad team dynamic among your team. And this is something that we need to keep an eye out for. Now I'm going to go through these fast because I want to get to the solutions. If you're familiar with this, I'm sure you're all too well to get to the solution. But I want to ask you, how many people in this room have a colleague who is like this in code reviews? Who's sitting next to them? That's why they can't. I commend you. There are some that were like, you know, looking at their colleagues. And this is a problem, but this is something that we need to be aware of, and this is something the entire team needs to be aware of. So this is good that it is there. Awareness is the first step. The next thing that we do wrong as reviewers is that we tend to focus on the developer rather than the code. So when we are leaving feedback or we are looking at our colleagues' code, we tend to leave comments that focus on them. that tend to say, this is, what is this? You know, we don't tend to focus on the code at hand, and we also write the comments in a way that tends to make the other developer feel like it's them who's doing something wrong. So this is another thing that we can and should fix. In a study that was done on interpersonal conflict and issues in code review, a very interesting finding I found was that the use of second-person pronouns at the beginning of the sentence is more likely to be impolite. If you take a look at all the words that they have looked through in their study where they separated those comments between toxic comments and non-toxic comments, you'll find very, very interesting usages of words. So here are the statistically more likely toxic comments. And I know that might be hard to see, but we'll talk about it in a moment. Statistically more likely in non-toxic comments. And what you'll find is that in most of the toxic comments are those second-person pronouns, you, if you want, do you think, you need to, you are, you want, if you think, you're, you. Focusing on the developer tends to be more toxic comments, apparently. And the only exception to this is in the non-toxic area where we say, could you, but this is a form of politeness or a form of asking someone in a nicer way. So focusing on the developer is something we don't want to do. The next thing that we do, I am guilty of this myself in the beginning, was skimming through reviews. So if there's 10 lines of code, there's 10 comments. If there's 800 lines of code, looks good to me. It's funny, but it's not. Because when you are on the receiving end of this pull request and you are expecting your colleague to properly review your code, to really take a look at it, to give it the due diligence that it needs, to go through the code review, because why are you going through it at all? This is a problem. This is a very, very big problem. And part of this problem is that as reviewers of code, we have this mindset of, well, the developer has a bug in their code. It's their fault. So even if we go through and look through it and skim through it, it's going to be them who ends up fixing it. Finally, we get to what I think is one of the most important things we need to do as a reviewer, and that is to write comments. But what we do wrong is we write ineffective comments. Ineffective comments lead to debates. They lead to animosity between teammates. They lead to miscommunication. They lead to ambiguity. Writing ineffective comments makes code reviews last so much longer because there's so much back and forth between you two, and it could even cause more rework because, again, you're not on the same page. At its essence, writing ineffective comments are usually subjective, so you get something like, return the result in an array instead, and that's it. No reasoning, nothing. You just get this piece of feedback as a comment. An ineffective comment can also be unclear. This could be better. Or they lack an outcome. There's something wrong here. And now you are left to figure that out. You are left to guess the mind of your reviewer and say, maybe this is what they meant. I'm going to do an update and fix it, and hopefully this is what gets my code review to pass. So writing ineffective comments is one of the larger issues that we have as reviewers and why our code reviews are poor. So as a reviewer, we don't leave our ego at the door. We focus on the developer rather than the code. We skim through reviews, and we write ineffective comments. So how do we fix those things? Well, number one, forget your ego. This is something that needs to be said, unfortunately, but if you remember that the code that you write is not you, and that the ownership of this code usually belongs to the entire team, because the entire team is working with the code, not just you, then you should be able to remember to forget your ego. Leave your titles behind, leave your qualms behind, focus on the code. Which goes into the next thing, focus on the code, not the developer. If we take a look back at that study, another interesting finding that is there is that we see many software engineering related engrams or words that they find among the non-toxic comments, but almost none in the toxic comments. So when you look back at those words that were considered non-toxic, all of those that actually focused on the code, here we see tests, files, pull requests, code, the pull request. Anything that tends to focus on the actual code is usually labeled as a non-toxic comment, meaning you're focused on the actual essence at hand. Next, we should be doing proper, thorough reviews. So one guideline, and this is going to be different for every team, is to review code in 25 to 45-minute focus bursts. There have been studies done that say the human mind tends to get weary after 45 minutes, and so you want to take advantage of the 45 minutes that you have where you are focused to give a code review its proper due diligence. Now, some people will say, no, I can focus way longer than that. That's great, do that. Some people will say, I am tired after 10 minutes of looking at code. Great, do that. Whatever fits for you is what should be done. If you are focused in the morning, look at code reviews in the morning. If you are focused in the afternoon, look at code reviews in the afternoon. Find what works for you and find what works for your team and find the ranges where you find that you are giving code reviews the proper due diligence that it needs. Next, don't be afraid to send back PRs that are too large to review. So a lot of folks have problems with this, and there are a lot of other reasons why they cannot send it or are afraid to send it. A lot of work has been done. There's a deadline coming up. And if we continue to use those excuses, then we're always going to deal with the large pull requests. So there has to be a point where, as a team, you start to say, hey, we are not going to review large pull requests. Not only is it not feasible for a single person to look at 800 files changed, but we need to do this in a more scalable way. Back to that mindset of developers thinking, well, the developer has a bug in their code, it's their fault. Really, what we should be thinking as reviewers is, how did I miss that? Instead of using the other person as the scapegoat, as the person to blame, we as reviewers have a responsibility to look at that code. Because again, otherwise, why are we doing a code review at all? So if we are able to shift our mindset as reviewers and say, this is also my responsibility to make sure I have done everything I could to make sure that the code that passes through is good, and that I'm proud to approve this code, then that will absolutely make our code reviews much better than what they are now. And lastly, writing ineffective comments. We need to write effective comments. Effective comments are objective, they're as specific as possible, and they have a focused outcome. So as reviewers, we need to be objective, right? We can't have any of our subjective feelings run into this when we do our review. Being objective means we suggest, but with facts. For example, if we are about to ask for a change, first pause, think about it, and then ask yourself, why are you asking the person to make that change? In a study, they found most developers who did this and took a moment to ask themselves why they were proposing a change either said, this change is not needed at all, so they did not write that comment out and did not ask for that change, or were more sure that they needed that change and were better able to articulate what they wanted in the comment they were about to leave. So taking a moment to pause and ask yourself why you want the other person, the author, to make this change is worthwhile as you are reviewing that code. As reviewers, we also need to be specific. Specificity means we need to be clear if something needs to be done. How many of you have gotten a whole bunch of comments and you don't know if everything needed something to be done or if it was just information? It takes some time to organize all of those comments, especially if they're not labeled as such. And so one really easy thing that you can do is to start using some comment labels. You may be familiar with one already. The nitpick. Who here nitpicks? Okay, you're not my friends. Nitpicks can be done in the very rare circumstances, I agree with you. But in most cases, at least in my teams, we try not to nitpick at the code review. But I bring the nitpick up because this is a great way to show how to be specific on a comment. We have a clear label at the very beginning that says what it is. In this case, it's a nitpick, so somebody can choose to ignore that. And then we have the actual nitpick, the sentence of what that nitpick is. For my teams, we would use a few. One would be needs change. This automatically says this is something you need to be aware of and you need to look at. And something else is needs rework. Let's discuss offline. This comment signal is used for things that would be too difficult to explain, or it's taking too long to get to the same page of what they're trying to say. So rather than writing out a novel in the comment, we ask somebody to take some time offline and discuss it. And then we have nitpicks there because, you just can't help it. Sometimes people will write nitpicks. Another way to do this is to use conventional comments. Who here is familiar with conventional commits? Okay, so this is similar, just towards comments. So here, comments are written like this, and they have the very same sentiment, where, to me, this is not a helpful comment, right? But by prefixing the comment with something, now you make it more readable. Now you make it, you fill a lot of context with just that label in the beginning of the comment. And so conventional comments follow this format right here. You have a label, you have a decoration, and you have a subject. So for example, if this comment that you're leaving is a question, and it's a non-blocking thing, meaning you don't have to address it in order for it to move on or to be approved, ask something there. And if you follow this format, you can also automatically parse this if you tend to analyze your comments and do some further investigation on how your teams do code reviews. So that's another way to be specific, is to use conventional comments. Lastly, you need to pinpoint what you're talking about. Most tools already do this, but if you need to do it, then it helps. Highlight the code that you are discussing, explicitly call out the method or the variable or the class names that you're talking about, and then call out the line numbers to be more succinct. The better able you are to be very specific about what you're talking about, the less likely it is for the author to be confused. The less confusion, the less time it takes for you both to be on the same page and for the overall code review to take. Finally, as reviewers, we need to provide a focused outcome. So in a different study where they looked at code review comments, they found that the most useful comments contain mostly verbs that denote some kind of transformation. So here they looked at, rather than toxic or non-toxic, they looked at comments that were useful versus not useful. And the useful ones had verbs that contained some sort of change. And so taking that finding, I've developed something called the triple R pattern. You can call it the R cubed pattern, the pirate pattern, or whatever you want to call it, but it's a really useful pattern if you're having trouble articulating how you want to ask an author to make a change. It is a request, rationale, and result. Request, have a sentence explaining what it is you want the author to do. Rationale, what's your reasoning behind it? Why are you asking them to make that change? A sentence or two explaining why the request is warranted goes here. And if you have any references or links, let's say you read a blog post, that's your reasoning for this. Let's say you have some team standards or conventions that you want to link to, that's where you point it. Rationale, telling the author why you're asking them to make that change is very, very important. And finally, the result. A measurable end state where the author can compare their change. So this could literally be some actual metrics that they have to reach. This could be a screenshot of what it's supposed to look like. Anything that they can use to say, yes, I'm on the right track, or this is exactly what the reviewer is asking me to do. So how do we put that into motion? Let's say you want to ask somebody to move a method. So request, can we move the authenticate user method into our library? Rationale, we have similar methods that are in the utilities library, and we also have this in our team working agreement that says we put these types of things into our utilities library. Result, after this change, can the calls to this go through the library rather than a standalone declaration? If you want to request a more meaningful variable name, same thing, request. Can we rename the variable item to something more, not as ambiguous? Rationale, so other than it being, not knowing what that means, you can say this is vague, provides little context, it's not meaningful within its scope, I don't understand this. Provide some rationale as to why that variable name is not meaningful enough. And then the result. This is now where you can suggest things. What we tend to do is we skip all of this. We say, change the name to this because it's more meaningful. And when we receive a comment like that, yes, most people will be like, oh, okay, I trust them, sure, I'll do it. But for most folks, it's better to see why is it more meaningful. Because if you just say it from yourself, then it's more subjective. Then it's this person telling me that this is more meaningful rather than a more objective, focused fact of why this is meaningful. So request, rationale, result. That is something that you can use almost anywhere, anytime. I guarantee you'll write better comments because of it. Triple R pattern. If you still have trouble and you are not getting anywhere, let's say you are going back and forth and you are, I want to say three or four comments deep. That is going nowhere. You need to take it offline. A lot of us tend to forget that we need to just have a discussion because something is not getting across to the other person. So if you find that you're going back and forth, you're now having a thread of 27 comments, that's not going to go anywhere. Instead, have an offline discussion. And even more important is, once you have that offline discussion, go back to that pull request and put another comment that says, what was the outcome of that discussion? That is so extremely helpful for anybody else that's reading that pull request, even yourself later on when you say, what happened here? You can now read the history of what happened. You were starting to get not on the same page. You said, hey, let's take this offline to discuss. And then you say another comment on what that outcome was. We've discussed this offline. Turns out this is much more work than what I was originally asking for. We will open a new pull request with the new work that needs to be done. Super simple. But sometimes when we don't return to that pull request and we don't add the outcome of that discussion, that's where those knowledge silos start to develop. That's where only those two people know what happened to that particular part, and only they know what was the outcome of that discussion. So coming back, I like to call it bookending the pull request. Adding the outcome of discussion is really, really helpful when you do take your discussions offline. So, reviewer, forget your ego. Focus on the code, not the developer, proper thorough reviews, and write effective comments. So now we know what we're doing as reviewers. Now, what are we doing wrong as authors? Can you think of one or two things? Are you hiding in shame because you did something just yesterday? I am. Number one, not being your own first reviewer. Do you know how many things we could catch if we took the time to look at our own code before we put it up for review? Do you know how many things could be saved if you just put your PR in draft status to say, this is still a work in progress, I'm still fixing it, I'm still going through it? Not being our own first reviewer means we miss a lot of things. It's like when we go through our emails and send it off without looking. I am not one of those people. I'm one of those that looks at it 6, 7, 8 times to make sure that there's no typo in my email before I send it. So taking this concept and applying it to code reviews, trying to look through, anticipate what your reviewer is going to see, make sure you're not missing anything silly, make sure the context that you have is actually written in the description. All of these things are our responsibility as authors. In order for us to have the code review be more successful, we need to do a little bit of work there. Our job is not done once we have finished the final commit. That is something we need to remember. So not being our own first reviewer is sometimes the cause of our own demise. The next thing is not using any automation during development. So when I say automation, I mean linting, I mean formatting, I mean static analysis, this will never be reached, and testing, any type of testing at all, automated testing. All of these things that you can catch during development, all of these things that you can fix during development, are things that you should do during development. I don't know about you, but I do not want to go back to the days where we are fighting about indentation or semicolons in a code review. We want to eliminate that. We don't want to have those types of conversations, especially with other silly things that could be caught by static analysis or testing. You add extra safeguards into your process, and you also add extra assurance to the reviewer that what you are reviewing has some sort of checks in place. Instead of looking at low-stakes issues, spacing, indentation, semicolons, you let the reviewer look for higher-stakes issues, things that you want them to catch, edge cases, parts of context that you did not realize and did not code into, a missing unit test. These are the things that you would want the reviewer to focus on. So using automation during development is something you absolutely should do. The next thing that we do is we make our PRs unmanageable. Unmanageable PRs, in essence, they're just too large, but there are too many files, the changes are not atomic, or if you have multiple parts of a large feature, they are in a single PR. PRs that are unmanageable are the bane of many developers' existence. There have been several studies that say what makes a code review not productive for them when the PR is too large. Every single time, it's because the PR is too large. Unrelated changes, things that don't make sense within the context of what you're asking the person to review, 500 files, 600 lines of code. If you're asking the reviewer to properly take a look at this code, that is way more than any single person could be asked to do. So the smaller you can make your pull requests, the better. And also, alongside of that, we treat the PRs as mystery novels. How many people has gotten a pull request like this to review? I hate it. I hate it. Because now I have to be Sherlock Holmes and go through and figure out what this is. Even their commit is very, very lazy. I don't know what this is about. There's no linked work item. There is nothing in here that says, is this a new bug fix? Is this an old bug fix? Nothing. So now you're asking the reviewer to do extra work to find out what it is that you are reviewing. That is something that a lot of us do wrong as authors. And lastly, we tie our worth to our code. This is very hard to separate. Most of us here are software developers. Most of us take some time to craft that perfect code. We recognize it as our baby. We are sending it off, and someone criticizes our baby. Someone criticizes an extension of ourself. And sometimes that's really hard to understand. This is where we get into situations where it's hard to give feedback because you don't want to hurt the person's feelings. This is where we get into situations where you don't want to go to pull requests because you don't want to be critiqued. But that's not the point. The point is, this is not you. We are not critiquing you. We are not hurting you. We're looking at the code. And so something that we tend to forget is that we need to separate ourselves from the code, especially in a code review process. Only then will objective feedback be able to flow through, and only then will you actually get real feedback, not sanitized feedback, not, oh yeah, everything looks great, but really they don't want to say anything because they don't want to cause an issue. That's not the point. We want to be able to have a culture of feedback, and code review is one of those very important parts of that. So as an author, these are all the things that we do wrong. We are not our own first reviewer. We don't use any automation during development. We make our PRs unmanageable, aka they're just too large. We treat our PRs as mystery novels, and we tie our worth to our code. So how do we fix all of those things? Well, first, we need to be our own first reviewer. The first thing that we should do before we submit those pull requests is to take a look. Is everything there? Is everything matched? Later on, we talk about PR templates, which can help with that, which are kind of checklists that say, here's everything that you need to put into this pull request to make sure that it's proper and ready to be reviewed. Be your own first reviewer on every pull request. Next, let the robots take over during development. This is really hard to see. I spent a really good amount of time on this. Has anyone ever watched the show Captain World? Does anybody know this reference? With our powers combined, no more annoying code review issues. Captain Planet, yes. Thank you, thank you. So this was my poor attempt at trying to show that all kinds of automation put together, when they put their rings together and call Captain Planet. And you, as a part of that, being a pro-automation developer, you likely reduce the amount of code review issues that you do not want to face. Make your PRs manageable, please, please. What this means, manageable PRs means you focus on an atomic change or a feature. Anything that is related, that is encapsulated, that needs to be submitted together so that it works together is what an atomic feature should be. Include what's only necessary for the code changes to work. Split multiple parts into multiple reviews. These also can likely be reviewed in 10 to 20 minutes. And based on a study by Dragan Stepanovic, he found that typically under 500 lines of code is where it's at for a manageable PR, because under 500 lines of code means there are more comments. Now, some of you are like, more comments? I don't want more comments. But the point is that the more comments there are, the more proper and thorough the review actually is. That means the person is actually spending time and looking through the code review rather than skimming it. So keeping it under 500 lines is kind of a guideline that he sets there. And then on a different study based on Microsoft, typically less than 20 files changed is what they found, where code reviews tend to be the most productive. So these are all guidelines on what a manageable PR looks like. It might be different for your team. I don't want you to go away from this talk and think, Adrienne said this is it. These are now our new guidelines. Everything has to fall within these guidelines. These are guidelines. They can ebb and flow according to your team, but they are a good place to start. And the other thing that I want to really reinforce here is that as a team, sometimes you get large PRs, and the problem is already there way too late. When you get a PR, sometimes the feature is just too large, or the design and planning phase creates features or things, work items that are way too large. But if you can try to remember that during your design and planning phase, spelling out your acceptance criteria, really asking yourselves if this feature needs to have all these things, and if it needs to be considered a single feature, making sure that you design smaller features will likely gain you smaller PRs. So just think about that. If you can think about that during the design and planning phases of your work, you can save yourself a little bit of time later on. Also, solve the mystery. Let your PRs tell the story. Do not ask your reviewers to be Sherlock Holmes. You should be looking at these PRs and saying, you, the author, you, can influence how long this PR is going to take. You have the power to say that this PR is going to go well or not. Because it is you who is going to fill out the description, and you who is going to curate the pull request to make sure that it is going to be successful for the reviewer. So make sure to add all of that context and description, anything that you need to set the reviewer up for success to make sure that the pull request goes well. There's a quote that I like to think about when thinking about this, and it's from Yamamoto Tsunetomo. And he says, when one is writing a letter, he should think that the recipient will make it into a hanging scroll. If you take a look at your pull requests and you do use them as the official record of how your code base changes over time, especially if you are able to change and trace every change back to a particular pull request, it is even more important that you use your pull requests to be very descriptive, to be context-filled. Anybody should be able to read your pull requests and make sense of why that change has been made. Not just the what, not just like a comment that says, here is a comment. You need to explain why that change has been made in your code base. And finally, remind yourself that you are not your code. So just as we're asking reviewers not to focus on us when they are reviewing our code, we also need to be reminded that we should not consider ourselves in this process. And if we do receive feedback, especially if it's objective feedback, that we don't consider ourselves to be attacked or consider ourselves to be stupid or consider ourselves at all. This is feedback to make the code better. So remind yourself that you are not your code. And these are all of the things that we should be doing as authors. We need to be our own first reviewer. We need to let the robots take over during development. We need to make our PRs manageable. We need to solve the mystery and make sure our PRs tell the story and remind ourselves that we are not our code. So now we all know what we're doing. This is the bare minimum. This is, if you have not been doing this, please start there, take a look at that, consider changing those parts of your roles in the code review. But we can go beyond those bare minimums, and we can make our code reviews even better than that. So the first thing I'll start with is create a team working agreement. Who here has a team working agreement for their team? Oh, that makes me really, really happy. You'd be surprised. There are a lot of teams who go, what's a team working agreement? For those who do not know what a team working agreement is, this is a living document that is co-created by the team, and it has all of their policies that they enforce in that agreement. It can be very wide-ranging from this is how we work, this is how we operate, to just having a team working agreement just for the code review process. But this is a very, very helpful thing to do and to start specifically for the code review process because it can eliminate a lot of debates that can happen. For example, have your actual code review process in your team working agreement. If you ask your team to actually talk to you and tell you every single part of the code review process, can they? Do they know every part? Do they know what happens when there's a blocker in a specific section? Having that whole workflow in your team working agreement is not only helpful as a referenceable thing for your team, it's also helpful for onboarding and for any new members and for pretty much anybody that needs to take a look at what the code review process is like and what to expect. Another really cool thing you can add is what are the different states of PR review that your team uses. So if we take a look here, probably the most common here is we have a draft state, we have a ready for review state, we have an in review state, we have a needs fixes state, which is optional, not many teams might use that, and of course we have approved, something that we're all familiar with. So if your team uses different states, it is very, very helpful to actually list out what those states mean. Remove the ambiguity. If your draft state says, this PR is not ready to review, clearly state that. Because some teams have a draft state that says, this PR is a work in progress. I actually want to solicit some feedback from you. And those are two very, very different states. So making sure you outline the states that your team uses is, again, very helpful for anybody to reference and to know exactly what is going on in your code review. Lastly, another thing that is very helpful to have in your team working agreement, what are your blocking issues versus your non-blocking issues? These are things that if you've come across them as a reviewer, you are allowed, you have spoken about this as a team, you have agreed as a team that if you come across this issue, the pull request can be blocked from approval. It is so dire or the problem is so bad that you are blocking the pull request from it. On the other hand, you might come across things, and these are very, very subjective, of non-blocking issues, things that you shouldn't be blocking the pull request on. This will help so many debates, and especially a lot of animosity between teams, because some folks will block PRs because they don't think this should go through. But if you as a team have committed and said this is an issue that we have said should not be allowed to block a pull request, and you have explicitly defined it in your team working agreement, then this is something that you can use as justification to say you shouldn't be blocking this pull request, or you should be blocking this pull request. So these are ideas of what you can add in your team working agreement to make them more effective for your code review. If possible, use PR templates. Who's using PR templates now? Yay! So, mentioned before, PR templates, these are things that you can use to help your authors. They're essentially markdown files that you place in the root of your branches, where every time you open a pull request of a specific type, this will be shown to the author, and it's like a checklist. It's a markdown template, right? So for example, let's say you had a bug fix PR template like this. You may ask for different things in a bug fix versus, say, a new feature. So this is an example of a bug fix. Maybe you're asking somebody, what's happening? What is the bug? Reproduction steps. How do I reproduce this as somebody who is reviewing this code? What is the root cause? Because if you're submitting a bug fix, I would hope you would know what the root cause was. What is the actual fix? What are you proposing here? Why is this fixing it? What is your testing strategy? How do I make sure that this is not going to cause anything else? Impact. Are there any other implications this fix may have? Regression risk. Are you confident that this fix will not introduce new issues? And this could also be as simple as just this checklist. You can be as thorough as you want or not as thorough as you want. You can have the things that your team cares about in this checklist, and you can also make it easier for the author because they don't have to remember all of this. They can just say, oh, let me look at this checklist when they open their pull requests, and make sure to self-acknowledge that everything that's important to your team has actually been done. Any notes? And thanks for hopefully squashing this bug. So you can have a PR template per type. You can have one for a doc update. You can have one for a new feature. And you can ask for different things. And again, this is a very helpful way to make your pull requests more consistent, hopefully more context-filled and more descriptive if the author actually follows it, and allows you to have a better mindset and be set in the right context as a reviewer because all that information is put in there for you. If possible, auto-assign reviewers. So, anybody here use a code owners file in GitHub? Nice. So, as an example, this is the same thing in Azure DevOps, but you can auto-assign reviewers via reviewer policy in Azure DevOps. It's really tiny, but if you go to your branch policies and you go over here to automatically include reviewers, you can set these rules. So for example, you can either make them required, and you can, similarly to the code owner's file, put in some patterns that matches and have someone be automatically assigned. So for example, if any pull request is opened and there are JavaScript files that are affected, I will be automatically assigned to this pull request. It is the same with the code owner's file. In a code owner's file, you have some fancy pattern matching that says if these particular files have been changed, you can either assign a specific person or a specific group to always be added to that pull request. And that is a great way to cut down on bias, because sometimes people just ask their buddy to review their pull requests, and that's how it goes all the time. This is also a great way to make sure the right people are always put on the pull requests. If you have legacy code, if you have code that a specific part of the code base that only a specific person knows, you can have them review the code. So automatically assigning reviewers is another way to expedite the code review process and make sure the best reviewers are selected. You can also explore something called informational reviewers. Who here has done informational reviewers? Ah, got you. Nobody's raising their hands. So informational reviewers are what they sound like. These are reviewers that you assign. They're optional. And the point of them is to have them look at what is happening in the pull requests and to have them actually try to gain or have that knowledge transferred. So think junior developers, think new team members, think people who are not familiar with that code base. This helps cut down on the, oh, I can't look at this pull request because I'm not familiar with this code. When are you going to be familiar with this code? Now is the time. In order to cut down, again, on these knowledge silos, having more of these informational reviewers assigned to more code that they are unfamiliar with is one way for them to see what is happening, to ideally get a sense of what is going on and to get a better understanding of what is happening here. Now, you can go one of two ways here. There are some really hardcore German developers who use this, and they actually give them the ability to approve pull requests. So you're thinking people who have no context of the pull request, but they're allowed to approve or not, they're giving them the privilege to be able to approve with the caveat that if something happens and some pull request that they approve goes wrong, they are allowed to work with the original author to fix it. But the point of this is that they want them to be able to gain so much knowledge to actually train and get that knowledge from the original author that they are now well-versed in that code themselves. That's why they give them the ability to actually approve those pull requests. They don't have to use it, but they do give them the ability. And the other way, the way that most people get started with this, is they do not give them the ability to approve, but they do require them to acknowledge that they've looked at the pull request. So, they have seen it, they have looked at it, maybe have asked a question, maybe have left a comment, something to say that they have actually taken a look at it and to ideally have absorbed some of that knowledge. So informational reviewers is something that is really, really useful for helping to spread that knowledge and get rid of that vacation factor where everybody is dependent on a single person because only one person is the only one who knows anything about the code base and can be the only person that approves pull requests. We want to try to eliminate that issue. Finally, code compliments are encouraged within reason. So, yes, every time we talk about code review, it's a critique. It's a process where we talk about what's wrong with our code or what could be better with our code. But code compliments, I think, within reason, are also encouraged for the team dynamic. If you put a code compliment for every single thing that loses its value, do not do that. But if you find something that's really, really novel, say your teammate was able to get some performance metric down to some really, really good metric, or they were able to solve a bug that nobody has been able to solve for quite some time, or they were able to fix something really, really quickly. Those types of things, I think, are warranted for a code compliment. And why not? Say that you learned something from it. Say that you didn't know that a language had that feature, and now you are thankful that you have learned it from this particular thing. These are the types of things that, when you do add them into a pull request, can make the team dynamic so much better and can also show that you can learn from anybody, not just the seniors, not just the principals, not just the tech leads. Anybody can learn anything from someone. And if they know that you were able to learn something from them and they receive that code compliment, then that is something that can change the dynamic of the team. So, Copenhagen, please do not settle with your code reviews. Please strive for great ones. They are so possible. They are within reach of your teams. They just require your teams to discuss what you want and what your process needs to be. And Manyatek, if you have any questions at all, if you like this talk, there's so much more in the book. Feel free to check it out. Feel free to come ask me any questions. And that is it. Thank you so, so much, Copenhagen.